Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his face with the back of his hand. The sun was getting low in the sky and dark clouds were moving in fast from the west. He had been riding all day, pushing his small herd of cattle across the rough Montana land. His horse was tired and so was he. Jake was a cowboy. He had been moving cattle across this land for 10 years now. He knew every hill, every valley, and every river. But today was different. The spring rains had been heavy this year. Rivers that were usually easy to cross were now deep and fast. The Clearwater River was just ahead. Jake could hear it before he could see it. The sound was loud and angry. When he reached the top of the small hill, he stopped his horse and looked down. His heart sank. The river was much bigger than usual. Brown water rushed and twisted between the rocks. White foam shot up where the water hit the stones. Tree branches and logs floated by like boats with no one to steer them. This was not the quiet river he knew. Jake counted his cattle. 15 head. Not a big herd, but they were good animals. He had bought them cheap in the town of Billings. Now he was taking them to a ranch near Helena. The man there would pay good money for them. But first Jake had to get them across this river. He looked at the sky again. The clouds were getting darker. Thunder rolled across the land like the sound of 100 horses running. Lightning flashed in the distance. A storm was coming, and it was coming fast. Jake had two choices. He could camp here and wait for the river to go down. That might take days, maybe a week. He did not have enough food for that long. His cattle would get hungry too. Or he could try to cross now before the storm made things worse. Jake was not a man who liked to wait. He had learned that in life sometimes you had to take chances. Sometimes waiting was more dangerous than acting. He rode along the river bank looking for the best place to cross. The water was deep everywhere, but there was one spot where the bottom looked solid. Big rocks stuck up from the water. If he was careful, he might be able to guide the cattle between them. The wind was getting stronger now. It made a whistling sound as it blew through the trees. Jake's horse shook its head and stepped sideways. Animals could feel storms coming better than people could. Jake dismounted and checked his gear. His rope was tied tight to his saddle. His rifle was secure in its holder. He had a small bag of food and a water bottle. Not much, but it would have to do. He looked at his cattle again. They were good animals, but cattle could be stupid when they were scared. In deep water, they might panic. If one cow got scared, they all would. Then Jake would lose everything. But Jake had moved cattle across rivers before. The trick was to stay calm and keep the animals moving. Cattle would follow a leader if they trusted him. Jake had to be that leader. The first drops of rain began to fall. Big, cold drops that hit Jake's hat with a sound like small stones. The storm was almost here. Jake got back on his horse and rode to the front of his herd. He gave a sharp whistle and started moving toward the river. The cattle looked at the water and did not want to go. Jake rode back and forth, pushing them forward with his horse and his voice. "Come on, girls," he said to them. "It is just water. You have been across water before." The first cow stepped into the river. The water came up to her belly. She stopped and tried to turn back. Jake rode up beside her and gently pushed her forward. One step, then another. Soon more cattle were following. The water was cold and moved fast, but it was not deeper than Jake had thought. His horse was strong and sure-footed. They could do this. Halfway across, the rain began to fall harder. Jake could barely see the other side of the river now. Water ran off his hat and down his face. His clothes were getting wet and heavy. Then he heard something that made his blood turn cold. It was a scream. Not the sound of an animal, but the sound of a person in trouble. Jake stopped his horse and listened. The sound came again, carried on the wind. It was coming from downstream where the river curved around a big rock. Jake looked at his cattle. They were still crossing, following each other like they should. But if he left them now, some might turn back. He could lose half his herd. The scream came again. This time Jake was sure. It was a child. Jake did not think about his cattle anymore. He turned his horse toward the sound and rode as fast as he could through the rushing water. His horse slipped on the wet rocks, but kept going. As he got closer to the big rock, Jake could see something in the water. It was small and dark, moving fast with the current. Then he saw an arm reach up above the water, then disappear again. It was a young boy, and he was drowning. The child was being swept downstream by the fast water. He was trying to grab onto things as he went by, but the current was too strong. Soon he would be carried into the really deep water, where the river ran between high rocks. No one could survive that. Jake dug his heels into his horse's sides. The animal jumped forward, fighting against the current. The water was deeper here, up to the horse's chest. But they kept going. The boy went under again. Jake thought he might have lost him. Then the small head came up again, 20 feet ahead. The child's mouth was open, trying to breathe, but water kept washing over his face. Jake could see now that the boy was not white. His skin was dark and his black hair was long. He was Indian, probably from one of the tribes that lived in these mountains. He was young, maybe 10 years old. The boy's strength was failing. His movements were getting weaker. Soon he would go under and not come up again. Jake rode his horse right into the deepest part of the river. The water came up to his boots. His horse was swimming now, fighting to keep its head above water. But they were getting closer to the boy. Jake took his rope from his saddle. He had to catch the boy before the current carried him away. But roping a person was not like roping a cow. If he missed or if the rope hurt the child, it could make things worse. The boy went under again. Jake counted seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. The boy's head came up again, but he was not moving his arms anymore. Jake threw his rope. It landed right next to the boy's head, but the child did not grab it. He was too weak or too scared. Jake pulled the rope back and tried again. This time he threw it so it would land across the boy's chest. The child's arm got caught in the loop. Jake pulled gently, trying not to hurt him. Slowly, Jake pulled the boy through the water toward his horse. When the child was close enough, Jake reached down and grabbed him. The boy was small and light, but he was like a dead weight. Jake pulled him up and across his horse's neck. The boy was not breathing. Jake turned his horse toward the riverbank. He had to get the child to dry land fast. Behind him, he could hear his cattle calling to each other as they finished crossing the river. Some had probably turned back, but Jake did not care about that now. All that mattered was the small, still form lying across his saddle. Jake's horse stumbled as it climbed up the muddy riverbank. The animal was tired from fighting the strong current. Water dripped from its sides and legs. Jake held the boy tight with one arm to keep him from falling. The child was cold. His skin looked blue and he was not moving. Jake could not tell if he was breathing. Water ran from the boy's long black hair and from his clothes. Jake found a flat piece of ground under some trees. The rain was falling hard now, but the thick branches gave some protection. He got down from his horse and gently lifted the boy. The child was heavier than he looked, but still small for his age. Jake laid the boy on the ground and knelt beside him. He had seen men pull drowning people from rivers before. He knew what to do, but he had never done it himself. First, Jake turned the boy on his side. Water came out of his mouth. That was good. Jake pressed on the child's back, trying to get more water out of his lungs. More water came up and some mud too. The boy's lips were blue and his face was white. Jake could not see his chest moving up and down. He put his ear close to the child's mouth. There was no sound of breathing. Jake had heard that sometimes you could breathe for a person who had stopped breathing. He tilted the boy's head back and opened his mouth. Then Jake put his mouth over the child's mouth and breathed out slowly. He did this 3 times, then waited. Nothing happened. Jake tried again. This time, after he breathed into the boy's lungs, he pressed on the child's chest with both hands. He pushed down hard, then let up. He did this 10 times, then breathed into the boy's mouth again. Still nothing. Jake's hands were shaking now. The boy was so young. He looked like he should be playing with other children, not floating in a river. Jake thought about how scared the child must have been in that cold, fast water. Jake kept trying. Breathe, push on the chest, breathe again. He lost count of how many times he did it. The rain was soaking through his clothes and his knees were getting muddy, but he did not stop. Then the boy coughed. It was a small sound, but it was the best sound Jake had ever heard. The child coughed again and water came up from his lungs. His eyes were still closed, but Jake could see his chest moving now. Jake turned the boy on his side again so more water could come out. The child coughed and spit for several minutes. Then his eyes opened. The boy's eyes were dark brown, almost black. They were full of fear. When he saw Jake's white face looking down at him, the fear got worse. The child tried to sit up, but he was too weak. "Easy there," Jake said softly. "You are safe now. I am not going to hurt you." The boy did not understand Jake's words, but he seemed to understand his voice. Jake spoke slowly and kept his voice gentle. He had learned that animals could tell if a person meant to hurt them just by listening to their voice. People were probably the same way. Jake took off his coat. It was wet, but it was warmer than nothing. He wrapped it around the boy's shoulders. The child was shivering hard now. That was good. It meant his body was warming up. The boy tried to talk, but only strange sounds came out. His throat was hurt from all the water he had swallowed. Jake held up his hand to tell the child not to try to talk yet. Jake looked around. He needed to make a fire to warm the boy up, but everything was wet from the rain. The wood, the leaves, even the rocks were soaked. Starting a fire would be hard, but Jake always carried some dry things in his saddlebags. He had learned long ago that fire could save your life. He went to his horse and took out a small metal box. Inside were matches wrapped in oiled cloth and some pieces of dry bark and wood shavings. Jake found a spot under the biggest tree where the ground was not too wet. He made a small pile of the dry bark and shavings. It took 3 matches, but finally a small flame started. Now Jake needed bigger pieces of wood. He broke dead branches from the trees and put them near the fire to dry. Slowly the fire got bigger. The warm light danced on the trees around them. Jake went back to the boy. The child was sitting up now, but he was still shivering. Jake helped him move closer to the fire. The warmth felt good on both of them. The boy pointed to himself and said something in his own language. Then he said it again, slower. It sounded like running wolf. Jake pointed to himself. Jake, he said. My name is Jake. The boy tried to say it. Jake, he said. It was close enough. Running wolf pointed across the river and said more words in his language. He sounded worried. Jake thought the boy was trying to tell him where he came from. Jake looked at the boy's clothes. His shirt and pants were made of soft animal skin, with small beads sewn on them in patterns. The beads were blue and white and red. Jake had seen work like this before. This boy was from one of the Indian tribes that lived in the mountains, but which tribe, and how far from home was he? Jake had lived in Montana for 10 years, but he did not know much about the Indians. Most white people stayed away from them. There had been fighting between white settlers and the tribes. Both sides had done bad things to each other. Most white men thought all Indians were dangerous. Most Indians thought all white men were enemies. But this was just a boy, a child who had almost drowned. Jake could not think of him as an enemy. Running Wolf was looking at Jake's horse and at the river. The cattle were gone now. Jake could see their tracks in the mud, leading away from the river. Some had probably made it across. Others had probably gone back the way they came. Jake had lost money today, but he had saved a life. That seemed more important now. The boy tried to stand up, but his legs were not steady yet. Jake caught his arm to keep him from falling. Running Wolf looked embarrassed. He was probably the kind of boy who did not like to be helped. Jake went to his saddlebags again and took out some food. He had dried meat and hard biscuits. Not much, but he was willing to share. He offered some to Running Wolf. The boy looked at the food, then at Jake. He was hungry. Jake could tell by the way he looked at the meat. But Running Wolf did not take it right away. Maybe his people had taught him not to take food from strangers. Jake tore off a piece of the dried meat and ate it himself. He wanted to show the boy that the food was safe. Then he offered it again. This time, Running Wolf took a small piece. He chewed it slowly. It was probably different from the food his people ate, but it was good. Soon he was eating more. While they ate, Jake tried to think about what to do next. The storm was getting worse. Lightning was flashing more often now, and the thunder was loud. They could not travel in this weather. But where could Jake take the boy? He did not know where Running Wolf's people lived. It could be many miles away. And if Jake showed up at an Indian camp, they might think he had hurt the boy. They might kill Jake before he could explain what had really happened. On the other hand, Jake could not just leave Running Wolf alone. The boy was far from home, and he was still weak from nearly drowning. Wild animals lived in these mountains. Bears, wolves, mountain lions. A boy alone would not last long. There was a trading post about a day's ride from here. The man who ran it sometimes traded with the Indians. Maybe he would know what tribe Running Wolf came from. Maybe he could help get the boy home safely. But Jake did not like that idea either. The trading post was not a good place for a child. The men there were rough, and they did not always treat Indians fairly. They might try to keep Running Wolf and sell him as a servant to someone. No, Jake decided. He would have to take the boy home himself. It was dangerous, but it was the right thing to do. The rain was still falling hard, but the fire was keeping them warm. Running Wolf had stopped shivering. Some color had come back to his face. He was a good-looking boy with strong features and bright eyes. He would grow up to be a fine man if he got the chance. Running Wolf said something and pointed to the sky. Then he made a motion with his hands like water falling. Jake understood. The boy was saying it was raining. Maybe he was trying to have a conversation. Jake pointed to the fire and rubbed his hands together. He was trying to say that the fire was warm. Running Wolf smiled a little. It was the first time Jake had seen him smile. They sat by the fire as the storm raged around them. Jake wondered what Running Wolf's family was doing right now. Were they looking for him? Were they worried? Did they think he was dead? Jake thought about his own family. His parents had died when he was young. He had no wife, no children. He had always been alone. But sitting here with this boy, sharing food and warmth, Jake felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt like he was taking care of someone who needed him. The rain began to slow down a little. Jake put more wood on the fire to keep it burning through the night. Tomorrow he would have to make a hard choice, but tonight he would just make sure Running Wolf stayed safe and warm. As the boy fell asleep beside the fire, Jake stayed awake and watched over him. He listened to the sounds of the night and kept the fire burning. It was going to be a long night, but Jake did not mind. He had work to do. Jake woke up when the fire started to die down. The rain had stopped, but the air was still cold and damp. Gray light was coming through the trees. It was early morning. Running Wolf was still sleeping, curled up close to the warm ashes. Jake had given the boy his blanket during the night. The child looked peaceful now, not scared like he had yesterday. His breathing was easy and quiet. Jake stood up slowly. His back was stiff from sleeping on the hard ground. He walked to the edge of their camp and looked around. The storm had blown down some tree branches and there were puddles of water everywhere. But the worst of the weather was over. Jake could hear his horse moving around, eating grass. The animal had stayed close during the night. That was good. Jake would need his horse for whatever came next. He went back to the fire and added some dry wood. The flames came back to life, making crackling sounds. The warmth felt good on Jake's cold hands. Running Wolf opened his eyes. For a moment he looked confused. Then he saw Jake and remembered where he was. The boy sat up and rubbed his eyes. "Good morning," Jake said softly. Running Wolf said something in his own language. It sounded like a greeting. The boy seemed much better today. His face had good color and his eyes were bright and alert. Jake heated some water in his coffee pot and made coffee for himself. He offered some to Running Wolf, but the boy did not want it. Instead, Jake gave him some water to drink and more dried meat to eat. While they ate, Jake tried to think about what to do. He had spent most of the night thinking about it, but he still was not sure of the best choice. Jake could take Running Wolf to the trading post. It was the safe thing to do. But Jake did not trust the men there to treat the boy right. They might be mean to him or try to keep him, or sell him to someone who would make him work like a slave. Jake could also try to find some other white people who would take care of Running Wolf. There were a few farms and ranches in the area, but most white people were afraid of Indians. They might not want to help even if the child had done nothing wrong. The third choice was the most dangerous one. Jake could try to find Running Wolf's people and take him home, but Jake did not know where they lived. It might take days or weeks to find them, and when he did find them, they might kill him before he could explain why he was there. But as Jake looked at the boy, he knew what he had to do. Running Wolf belonged with his own people. He belonged with his family. Jake had to try to get him home no matter how dangerous it was. Jake pointed to Running Wolf, then pointed in different directions. He was trying to ask which way the boy's home was. Running Wolf understood. He stood up and looked around at the mountains and trees. Then he pointed toward the northwest, where the mountains were higher and more wild. Jake nodded. He had been afraid of that. The northwest was where the really wild country was. Few white men had ever been there. It was the land of the mountain tribes, the ones who had never made peace with the white government. But Jake had made his decision. He would take Running Wolf home. Jake started to pack up his things. He put out the fire and rolled up his blanket. Running Wolf watched him work. The boy seemed to understand that they were getting ready to leave. When Jake went to get his horse, Running Wolf followed him. The horse was a big brown animal with white spots on its legs. Jake had owned him for 3 years. The horse was strong and smart, and Jake trusted him. Running Wolf looked at the horse with interest. He reached out slowly and touched the animal's neck. The horse did not mind. Indian children probably grew up around horses, Jake thought. Jake put his saddle on the horse and tied his gear behind it. Then he helped Running Wolf climb up. The boy was light and moved easily. He had probably been riding horses since he was very small. Jake got on behind Running Wolf. The horse snorted a little at carrying 2 people, but he was strong enough for the job. They started riding toward the northwest. Jake let Running Wolf guide the way. The boy seemed to know where they were going. As they rode, Jake thought about what might happen when they found Running Wolf's people. The best thing that could happen was that they would be grateful that Jake had saved their child. They might even reward him, but Jake knew that was not likely. More likely they would think Jake had kidnapped the boy. Or they might think Jake was a scout for soldiers who were coming to attack them. Either way, they would probably kill Jake first and ask questions later. Jake had his rifle, but one gun would not be much help against a whole tribe of warriors. If they decided to kill him, there would be nothing he could do to stop them. But Jake was not the kind of man who worried too much about things he could not control. He had decided to do the right thing. If it got him killed, at least he would die knowing he had tried to help a child get home. They rode for several hours through country that got wilder and more rough. There were no roads here, just animal paths between the trees. The mountains were getting higher and there were deep valleys between them. Running Wolf seemed to know exactly where he was going. Sometimes he would point to a certain mountain or rock formation and say something in his language. Jake guessed the boy was recognizing landmarks. Around noon, they stopped to rest by a small stream. The water was clear and cold. Both Jake and Running Wolf drank some and filled Jake's water bottle. While they rested, Running Wolf tried to tell Jake something. He pointed to himself, then to the mountains ahead. Then he held up his fingers. First one hand, then both hands, 10. Then he held up his hands again and again and again, many 10s. Jake thought the boy was trying to tell him how far they still had to travel. Many days, maybe. That was not good news. Jake did not have enough food for a long trip. And the longer they were in Indian country, the more dangerous it would be. But they had come this far. Jake was not going to turn back now. Running Wolf also tried to tell Jake about his family. He pointed to himself, then held his hand low like he was showing the height of children. Then he held his hand higher and higher still. Jake thought the boy was saying he had brothers and sisters, some younger and some older. Then Running Wolf made his face look very serious and stern. He held his hand up high and stood very straight. Jake guessed he was pretending to be his father. The boy's father must be a tall man who looked important. Jake pointed to himself and shook his head. He was trying to tell Running Wolf that he had no family. The boy looked sad when he understood this. He said something in his language that sounded kind. They got back on the horse and kept riding. The country was getting even more wild now. Jake had never been this far into the mountains before. He was completely depending on Running Wolf to guide them. Late in the afternoon, they came to a high ridge. Running Wolf got excited and pointed ahead. Jake looked where the boy was pointing and saw smoke rising from a valley far below. Running Wolf said something that sounded happy. Jake guessed they were getting close to the boy's home, but as they got closer, Jake could see that this was not just a small camp. There were many fires making smoke. This was a big village, maybe even several villages together. Jake's heart started beating faster. He had been hoping Running Wolf's people would be a small band, maybe 20 or 30 people. But this looked like hundreds of people. Running Wolf was very excited now. He was talking fast in his language and pointing at different parts of the valley. Jake could see many teepees spread out along a river. There were hundreds of horses grazing in the meadows. And there were people everywhere. Jake stopped his horse on the ridge and looked down at the scene below. He was one white man about to ride into a village of several hundred Indians. It was probably the most dangerous thing he had ever done in his life, but Running Wolf was almost home now. The boy was so happy that Jake did not have the heart to turn back. They had come too far to quit now. Jake took a deep breath and started his horse down the hill toward the valley. Whatever happened next, he had done his best to help a child get home. That had to count for something. As they got closer to the village, Jake could see people pointing at them. Word of their approach was spreading fast. Soon there would be warriors coming to meet them. Jake's hand moved toward his rifle, then stopped. If he was going to die today, he would not die fighting. He would die trying to return a lost child to his family. Running Wolf was calling out now, shouting words in his language. Jake could not understand what the boy was saying, but his voice sounded joyful. He was telling his people that he was coming home. Jake hoped that would be enough to keep them both alive. The first person to meet them was a young warrior on a painted horse. He came riding fast up the hill with a lance in his hand and war paint on his face. When he saw Running Wolf, he stopped his horse so quickly that it reared up on its back legs. The warrior shouted something in the Indian language. Running Wolf shouted back. They talked back and forth for several minutes. Jake could not understand the words, but he could tell that Running Wolf was explaining what had happened. The warrior looked at Jake with hard, suspicious eyes. Jake kept his hands where the warrior could see them. He did not reach for his rifle or make any sudden moves. More warriors were coming now. They rode out from the village in a group, their horses kicking up dust. Jake counted them, 10, 15, 20 men. All of them were armed with lances, bows, or rifles. They surrounded Jake and Running Wolf, but they did not attack. They seemed to be waiting for something. Running Wolf kept talking, telling his story over and over. Sometimes he pointed to Jake, sometimes to the river, sometimes to his own chest. Jake guessed the boy was telling them about falling in the water and how Jake had pulled him out. One of the warriors, an older man with gray in his hair, seemed to be the leader. He asked Running Wolf many questions. The boy answered them all, his voice getting more excited as he talked. Finally, the older warrior made a gesture with his hand. All the other warriors lowered their weapons. The man rode closer to Jake and looked at him for a long time. His eyes were dark and deep, like he was trying to see into Jake's soul. Then the warrior said something to Running Wolf. The boy slid down from Jake's horse and ran to hug the older man. Jake realized this must be Running Wolf's father. The man who was Running Wolf's father was tall and strong, with broad shoulders and powerful arms. His hair was black with streaks of gray, and it hung in 2 long braids down his back. He wore a shirt made of soft buckskin, decorated with beads and porcupine quills. On his head was a band of leather with 3 eagle feathers hanging from it. This was clearly a man of importance. A chief, or at least a war leader. Jake could see the resemblance between him and Running Wolf. They had the same dark eyes and the same strong jaw. Running Wolf's father held the boy close for a moment, then pushed him back to look at him. He examined the child carefully, checking to make sure he was not hurt. When he was satisfied that Running Wolf was healthy, he looked at Jake again. The chief said something to Jake. His voice was deep and serious. Jake did not understand the words, but he could tell it was a question. "I do not speak your language," Jake said, "but your son fell in the river. I pulled him out. I brought him home." The chief frowned. He turned to one of the younger warriors and said something. The young man rode away quickly toward the village. While they waited, more people came from the village. Women and children and old men walked up the hill to see what was happening. They all stared at Jake with curious eyes. Most of them had probably never seen a white man before. After a few minutes, the young warrior came back. With him was an old Indian man who walked with a wooden stick. The old man's hair was completely white and his face was lined with wrinkles. But his eyes were sharp and intelligent. The old man came up to Jake's horse and looked up at him. "You are a white man," he said in English. His accent was thick, but Jake could understand him. "Yes," Jake said. "My name is Jake Morrison." "I am Spotted Eagle," the old man said. "I speak some white man's words. I lived at mission school when I was boy." Jake was relieved. Finally, someone he could talk to. "This boy," Jake said, pointing to Running Wolf. "He fell in the river. I pulled him out. I brought him back to his people." Spotted Eagle translated this to the chief. The chief asked several questions, and Spotted Eagle translated them to Jake. "Chief Standing Bear wants to know why you help his son," Spotted Eagle said. "White men and red men are enemies. Why you not leave boy to die?" Jake thought about how to answer this. "He was just a child," Jake said finally. "A child in trouble. I could not leave him to die," Spotted Eagle translated this. Chief Standing Bear listened, then asked another question. "Chief wants to know if you are scout for soldiers," Spotted Eagle said. "If you come to spy on our village?" "No," Jake said. "I am just a cowboy. I was moving cattle across the river when I found your boy. I came here alone." This started a long discussion among the warriors. They talked back and forth in their own language, their voices getting louder and more heated. Jake could tell they were arguing about what to do with him. Running Wolf was still standing next to his father. The boy kept talking, trying to tell the men something. Finally, Chief Standing Bear held up his hand for quiet. He said something to Running Wolf, and the boy nodded. Then Chief Standing Bear rode his horse closer to Jake. He reached out and touched Jake's horse, then touched Jake's arm. He said something in his language that sounded formal and important. Chief Standing Bear says you are welcome in his village. Spotted Eagle translated. You saved his son's life. Now you are under his protection. Jake felt relieved, but he was not sure what this meant. What happens now? He asked. You come to village, Spotted Eagle said. You eat with Chief's family. Tomorrow we decide what to do with you. Jake did not like the sound of that last part, but he did not have much choice. He was surrounded by armed warriors in the middle of their territory. If they wanted to kill him, they could do it whether he went to the village or not. All right, Jake said. I will come. The group started moving down toward the village. Jake rode in the middle with warriors all around him. Running Wolf rode with his father, chattering excitedly in their language. The boy kept pointing back at Jake and making gestures. As they got closer to the village, Jake could see how big it really was. There were more than 100 teepees spread out along the river. Some were small for just one family. Others were large, big enough for several families to live in. People came out of their teepees to watch Jake pass by. Children ran alongside his horse, staring at him with wide eyes. Women whispered to each other and pointed. Old men stood with their arms crossed, their faces serious. Jake had never felt so out of place in his life. Every person here was different from him. Their skin was darker, their hair was black. Their clothes were made of animal skins instead of cloth. They spoke a language he could not understand, and they lived in a way that was completely foreign to him. But as he looked around, Jake saw that these people were not so different after all. The children were playing games just like white children did. The women were cooking food and taking care of their families. The men were working on their weapons and tools. These were just people, living their lives the best way they knew how. Chief Standing Bear led Jake to a large teepee in the center of the village. It was decorated with painted pictures of buffalo and eagles and other animals. Several eagle feathers hung from the top of the teepee poles. This is Chief's lodge, Spotted Eagle explained. You will stay here tonight. Jake got down from his horse. A young warrior took the animal away to be fed and watered. Jake watched his horse go, hoping he would see it again. Chief Standing Bear gestured for Jake to follow him into the teepee. Jake had to duck his head to get through the opening. Inside, the teepee was larger than it looked from outside. There was a fire pit in the center with a small fire burning. Smoke went up through a hole in the top of the teepee. Around the edges were beds made of buffalo robes and blankets. Several women were sitting around the fire. One was middle-aged with kind eyes and graying hair. The others were younger. Jake guessed they were Chief Standing Bear's wives and daughters. Running Wolf ran to the middle-aged woman and hugged her. She held him tight and spoke to him in a soft, worried voice. This was clearly his mother. She had been afraid that her son was dead, and now she was overjoyed to have him back. The woman looked at Jake over Running Wolf's head. Her eyes were full of gratitude. She said something to her husband. Running Wolf's mother thanks you for bringing her son home, Spotted Eagle translated. She says you will always be welcome in her lodge. Jake nodded to the woman. Tell her I am glad I could help, he said. Chief Standing Bear sat down on a pile of buffalo robes and gestured for Jake to sit across from him. Spotted Eagle sat beside the chief to translate. Now we must talk about serious things, Spotted Eagle said. You have done good thing by saving Running Wolf, but you are white man in Indian territory. This creates problems, Jake nodded. He had known this conversation was coming. Many of our people have been killed by white men, Spotted Eagle continued. White men have taken our land, killed our buffalo, broken their promises to us. Many of our warriors want to kill all white men they see. I understand, Jake said, but I am not your enemy. I just wanted to help a child. Chief Standing Bear believes this, Spotted Eagle said, but not all people in village believe it. Some think you are spy. Some think you are bait to bring soldiers here. Jake looked around the teepee. The women were preparing food, but he could tell they were listening to every word. Outside, he could hear voices talking in the Indian language. Word of his presence was spreading through the village. What will happen to me? Jake asked. Spotted Eagle translated the question to Chief Standing Bear. The chief thought for a moment before answering. Jake woke up before dawn. The fire in the teepee had burned down to glowing coals and the air was cold. He could hear people moving around outside getting ready for the new day. Through the teepee walls, Jake could hear the sounds of the village waking up. Dogs were barking, horses were snorting, and children were laughing as they played. It sounded like any town in the morning, except that the voices were speaking in a language Jake did not understand. Chief Standing Bear was already awake, sitting by the fire and smoking a long pipe. The smoke smelled different from tobacco. It was sweet and earthy, like burning grass and herbs. Running Wolf was still sleeping, curled up in his buffalo robes. His mother sat nearby, watching over him. She had probably stayed awake most of the night, grateful to have her son back home. Spotted Eagle came into the teepee just as the sun was starting to rise. The old man looked serious and tired. "Council will meet when sun is straight overhead," he told Jake. "Until then, Chief Standing Bear wants to show you village. He wants people to see you, to see that you are not dangerous." Jake nodded. He understood. The more people who saw him acting peacefully, the better his chances might be at the council meeting. After a breakfast of cornmeal mush and dried berries, Jake followed Chief Standing Bear out of the teepee. Outside, the village was fully awake now. Jake was amazed by how big it really was. In the daylight, he could see that this was not just one tribe, but several tribes camped together. The teepees were arranged in groups, with each group having its own style of decoration. Some teepees were painted with geometric patterns. Others had pictures of animals or battles. A few had no decoration at all. "Many bands come together for summer gathering," Spotted Eagle explained as they walked. "Blackfoot, Blood, Piegan tribes, maybe 2,000 people here." 2,000 people. Jake's heart sank. He had hoped Running Wolf's people would be a small band. But this was like a whole city of Indians. If they decided to kill him, there would be no escape. As they walked through the village, people stopped what they were doing to stare at Jake. Some looked curious. Others looked angry or suspicious. Children followed behind them, whispering to each other. Chief Standing Bear seemed to be showing Jake off deliberately. He stopped to talk to various people, and always he would point to Jake and say something. Jake guessed the chief was telling them about how Jake had saved Running Wolf. They passed groups of women working on hides, stretching them out on wooden frames and scraping them clean. Other women were cooking over fires or mending clothes. Jake was surprised by how skilled they were. Their work looked as good as anything he had seen white women make. Near the river, men were working on weapons. Some were making arrows, carefully shaping the shafts and attaching stone or metal points. Others were repairing bows or sharpening knives. Jake noticed that many of them had rifles too, good ones that looked new. "Where did they get the rifles?" Jake asked Spotted Eagle quietly. "Trade with French trappers," the old man said. "Also take from soldiers in battles. Our warriors are good fighters." Jake believed it. These men looked strong and capable. Their bodies were hard from years of hunting and fighting. Their eyes were alert and intelligent. Jake would not want to fight against them. They came to an area where young men were training with horses. Jake had heard that Indians were good riders, but he had never seen anything like this. The young warriors could ride at full speed while hanging off the side of their horses, using the animal's body as a shield while they shot arrows at targets. One young man was standing on his horse's back while the animal galloped in circles. Another was picking up objects from the ground while riding at full speed, never slowing down or losing his balance. "Our young men learn to ride before they can walk good," Spotted Eagle said proudly. "Horse and rider become like one animal." Jake was impressed. These riders were better than any cowboy he had ever seen. As they continued through the village, Jake began to understand how organized this society was. It was not just a random collection of families living together. There were clear rules and structures. The teepees were arranged in a specific pattern, with the most important chiefs having the largest teepees in the center. Around them were the teepees of the warriors and their families. At the edges of the village were the teepees of the younger men and the families with lower status. There were also specific areas for different activities. The horse herds were kept in meadows upstream from the village, where they would not pollute the water. The garbage and waste were disposed of downstream. The workshops where people made tools and weapons were set up where the smoke would blow away from the living areas. "Your people are very organized," Jake told Spotted Eagle. The old man smiled. "White men think Indians are wild and stupid," he said. "But we have lived this way for hundreds of years. We know how to take care of ourselves." They visited the area where the elderly people lived. Here, Jake saw men and women with white hair and lined faces sitting in the shade and working on various crafts. Some were making baskets from willow branches. Others were carving designs on pieces of bone or antler. One very old woman was telling a story to a group of children. She spoke in a sing-song voice, using her hands to act out parts of the story. The children listened with wide eyes, completely absorbed in her tale. She tells story of how Coyote stole fire from the sky people, Spotted Eagle explained. Our children learn history and wisdom through stories. Jake watched the old woman and the children. It reminded him of his own childhood when his grandmother would tell him stories before bed. People everywhere seemed to have the same basic needs, for family, for community, for passing on knowledge to the next generation. In another part of the village, Jake saw something that surprised him. There was a large teepee that seemed to be used as a school. Inside, a middle-aged man was teaching a group of children to read and write, using books written in English. Some of our people believe we must learn white man's ways to survive, Spotted Eagle explained. They think our children should know how to read and write in English, how to do business with white men. What do you think? Jake asked. Spotted Eagle was quiet for a moment. I think knowledge is good, he said finally. But I also think our own ways are good too. Children should learn both. As the morning went on, Jake began to see that this village was more complex than he had first thought. It was not just a collection of primitive people living in the wilderness. It was a sophisticated society with its own laws, customs, and ways of solving problems. He saw a group of men sitting in a circle, apparently settling some kind of dispute. They talked calmly and respectfully, listening to each person's point of view before making a decision. No one shouted or got angry. It seemed more civilized than many meetings Jake had seen in white towns. He saw women teaching their daughters how to prepare food, how to work with hides, and how to take care of babies. He saw men teaching their sons how to hunt, how to make weapons, and how to ride horses. Everyone had a role, and everyone seemed to know what was expected of them. But Jake also saw signs of the changes that were coming to this way of life. Some of the younger men wore white man's clothes mixed with traditional Indian clothing. Some of the women used metal pots and pans instead of pottery or baskets. There were a few white man's tools scattered around, axes, saws, and other items that had come through trade. Your people are changing, Jake observed. Everything changes, Spotted Eagle said sadly. Question is whether we change by choice or because we are forced to change. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Jake could feel the tension building in the village. People were preparing for the council meeting. Warriors were putting on their best clothes and war paint. Chiefs were gathering their ceremonial items, special pipes, medicine bundles, and eagle feathers. Jake began to feel nervous about what was coming. In a few hours, these people would decide whether he lived or died. He had seen enough of the village now to know that they were not the wild savages that many white people believed them to be. They were intelligent, organized people with their own sense of justice. But that did not necessarily mean they would let him live. They had good reasons to distrust and hate white men. Too many promises had been broken. Too many of their people had been killed. Too much of their land had been taken away. Running Wolf found Jake as they were walking back toward the chief's teepee. The boy ran up and took Jake's hand, chattering excitedly in his own language. He seemed completely happy and unaware of the danger Jake was in. Running Wolf wants to show you his horse, Spotted Eagle translated. The boy led Jake to where the horses were kept. He pointed proudly to a small pinto pony with brown and white markings. The horse was young and spirited, perfect for a boy Running Wolf's age. Running Wolf demonstrated his riding skills, jumping onto the horse's back without using a saddle or bridle. He rode around in circles, showing off for Jake. The boy was a natural rider, completely at ease on horseback. He is very good, Jake told Spotted Eagle. His father must be proud of him. Chief Standing Bear says Running Wolf will be great warrior someday, Spotted Eagle said, but first he must learn wisdom. That is why this thing with you is important. Running Wolf sees that not all white men are enemies. This is a good lesson for him. When the sun reached the middle of the sky, drums began to beat throughout the village. The sound was deep and steady, like a giant heartbeat. Jake felt the rhythm in his chest as he followed Chief Standing Bear toward the center of the village. A large circle had been cleared near the biggest teepee. People were gathering around the edges of the circle, sitting on the ground or standing in groups. Jake could see that this was not just a meeting, it was a ceremony. In the center of the circle, a fire had been built. The flames danced in the still air, sending up a column of white smoke. Around the fire, several men were arranging objects, pipes, bundles wrapped in animal skins, and other items that Jake guessed must be sacred to these people. Chief Standing Bear led Jake to a place near the fire and gestured for him to sit down. Jake lowered himself to the ground, trying to look calm even though his heart was pounding. Around the circle, he could see hundreds of faces looking at him. Some looked curious, some angry, some suspicious. Spotted Eagle sat down beside Jake. "Do not speak unless council asks you question," the old man whispered. "Show respect for our ways, and maybe they will respect you." One by one, the chiefs and war leaders entered the circle. There were more than 20 of them, all dressed in their finest clothes. Some wore shirts made of soft buckskin decorated with beads and quills. Others wore feathers in their hair, or necklaces made of bear claws. All of them looked serious and important. The last man to enter the circle was very old, with white hair that hung down to his waist. His face was so wrinkled that Jake could barely see his eyes, but when the old man walked, everyone else grew quiet and respectful. "That is Wise Owl," Spotted Eagle whispered. "He is oldest man in all the tribes. His word carries much weight." Wise Owl sat down across the fire from Jake. The old man stared at him for a long time without speaking. Jake tried to meet his gaze respectfully, but those ancient eyes seemed to see right through him. Chief Standing Bear stood up and began to speak. His voice was strong and clear, carrying across the circle to everyone who was listening. Jake could not understand the words, but he could tell that the chief was telling the story of how Jake had saved Running Wolf. Several times during the speech, Chief Standing Bear pointed to Jake. Each time the crowd murmured and shifted. Jake could feel their eyes on him, judging him, trying to decide what kind of man he was. When Chief Standing Bear finished speaking, he sat down. Another chief stood up, a younger man with scars on his arms and chest. This man's voice was angry and harsh. Even without understanding the language, Jake could tell that this chief did not like him being here. Spotted Eagle leaned close to Jake. "Red Hawk says you are spy," he whispered. "He says white men never help Indians unless they want something. He thinks you come to learn about our village so you can bring soldiers here." Red Hawk spoke for several minutes, his voice getting louder and more heated. Other young warriors nodded their heads in agreement. Jake could see that many people believed what Red Hawk was saying. When Red Hawk sat down, another man stood up. This one was middle-aged, with gray streaks in his black hair. He spoke more calmly than Red Hawk, but his words seemed just as serious. "Bearclaw says even if you are not spy, you are still danger," Spotted Eagle translated. "He says if we let you go, you will tell other white men about our village. He says soldiers will come and attack us." Jake wanted to say something to defend himself, but Spotted Eagle's hand on his arm reminded him to stay quiet. This was not his time to speak yet. More chiefs spoke, some for Jake and some against him. The debate went on for over an hour. Jake could feel sweat running down his back even though the day was not hot. His life hung in the balance of this discussion, and he could not even understand what was being said. Finally, Wise Owl held up his hand. Everyone fell silent immediately. The old man struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on a wooden walking stick. When he spoke, his voice was thin and reedy, but everyone strained to hear every word. Spotted Eagle listened carefully, then translated for Jake. "Wise Owl says this is a difficult question. He says in old days, any white man found in our territory would be killed, but these are not old days. He says we must think about what is best for our people's future." Wise Owl paused and looked directly at Jake. Then he continued speaking. He says, "You have done something that is hard to explain." Spotted Eagle translated. "You risked your life to save Indian child. This is not what white men usually do. Either you are a very good man or you are a very clever spy." The old man sat down again. Chief Standing Bear stood up and said something to the circle. Several men nodded their heads. "Now they will ask you questions," Spotted Eagle said to Jake. "Answer truthfully. They will know if you lie." Chief Standing Bear spoke directly to Jake, asking a question. Spotted Eagle translated. "He wants to know why you saved Running Wolf. What did you hope to gain?" Jake stood up slowly. He could feel hundreds of eyes watching him. "I did not think about gaining anything," he said. "I saw a child drowning. I could not let him die." Spotted Eagle translated Jake's answer. Some of the chiefs nodded, but others looked skeptical. Red Hawk asked the next question. He wants to know if you have told anyone about finding our village, Spotted Eagle said. No, Jake replied. I have not spoken to any white men since I found Running Wolf. No one knows I am here. Bearclaw asked a question. He wants to know what you will do if we let you go, Spotted Eagle translated. Will you bring soldiers to attack us? Jake thought carefully before answering. I am not a soldier and I do not work for the army, he said. I am just a cowboy. I move cattle from one place to another. I have no reason to bring trouble to your people. But will you tell other white men about our village? Red Hawk demanded through Spotted Eagle. Jake hesitated. This was a hard question. If he said he would never tell anyone, they might not believe him. If he said he might tell someone, they might kill him to keep the secret safe. I will not tell anyone who would bring harm to your people, Jake said finally. But if someone asked me about Running Wolf, I would tell them that I returned a lost child to his family. I would not lie about that. This answer caused a lot of discussion among the chiefs. They talked back and forth for several minutes. Jake could not tell if his answer had helped or hurt his case. Wise Owl asked a question. His voice was so quiet that Jake had to strain to hear Spotted Eagle's translation. He wants to know what you think of our people. Do you think we are savages like most white men believe? Jake looked around the circle at the faces watching him. These were not savages. They were intelligent, organized people with their own rich culture. The village he had seen that morning was proof of that. I think you are people just like white people, Jake said. You live differently than we do, but that does not make you better or worse. You have families that you love. You have children that you want to protect. You have your own ways of doing things that work for you. Do you think white men and red men can ever live in peace? Wise Owl asked through Spotted Eagle. This was perhaps the most important question of all. Jake thought about everything he had seen and learned over the past few days. I think they can, he said slowly. But both sides would have to change. White men would have to stop thinking that their way is the only right way. And red men would have to stop thinking that all white men are enemies. People like Running Wolf and me. We proved that it is possible for us to help each other. The discussion that followed Jake's answers went on for a long time. Chiefs stood up and gave speeches. Warriors argued with each other. Women in the crowd called out their opinions. Jake noticed that not everyone agreed with each other. Some people were clearly in favor of letting him go. Others wanted him killed. Still others seemed to be proposing some middle ground. As the debate continued, Jake saw Running Wolf slip into the circle and sit down next to his father. The boy looked worried. He probably understood that Jake's life was in danger. Running Wolf tugged on his father's sleeve and said something. Chief Standing Bear shook his head and told the boy to be quiet. But Running Wolf kept talking, his voice getting more urgent. Finally, Chief Standing Bear held up his hand for silence. He said something to the circle, then gestured for Running Wolf to stand up. The boy stood on shaky legs and began to speak. His voice was small and thin compared to the voices of the grown men, but everyone listened carefully to what he had to say. Running Wolf spoke for several minutes, sometimes pointing to Jake, sometimes touching his own chest. Jake could not understand the words, but he could hear the emotion in the boy's voice. Running Wolf was pleading for Jake's life. When the boy finished speaking, he sat down next to his father. Tears were running down his cheeks. Chief Standing Bear put his arm around his son and held him close. The circle was quiet for a long moment. Then Wise Owl spoke again, his voice even softer than before. He says, Running Wolf has reminded us of something important, Spotted Eagle translated. The boy says that Jake is his friend. He says friends do not let friends be killed. He asked the council to remember that even children can sometimes see things more clearly than adults. Wise Owl paused, then continued. He says the council will now vote. Each chief will give his decision. Wise Owl's ancient eyes fixed on Jake as he spoke. The old man's voice was barely above a whisper, but in the absolute silence of the circle, every word carried clearly to Jake's ears. Even though he could not understand them, Spotted Eagle listened intently, his weathered face showing no emotion. Jake felt like his heart might burst from beating so hard. Around the circle, hundreds of people waited to hear the translation that would seal his fate. Wise Owl says the council has spoken, Spotted Eagle finally said. The vote was close. Many chiefs wanted to kill you. Many others wanted to let you go free. But there was no clear majority for either choice. Jake's stomach dropped. What did that mean? Would they keep him prisoner? Would they vote again? Wise Owl continued speaking, his thin voice growing slightly stronger. Because there was no clear vote, The decision falls to the oldest and wisest among us. Spotted Eagle translated. Wise Owl must decide your fate alone. The old chief struggled to his feet again, leaning heavily on his walking stick. He looked even more frail standing up, like a strong wind might blow him over, but his eyes were sharp and alert as they studied Jake. Wise Owl began to speak, pausing often to catch his breath. Spotted Eagle translated as he went. He says he has lived for more than 80 winters. He has seen much change in the world. When he was young, there were no white men in this land. The tribes lived as they had always lived, following the buffalo, making war and peace with each other according to the old ways. The old man paused and coughed, a dry sound like wind through dead leaves. Then the white men came, first just a few, trappers and traders who respected our ways and learned our languages. These men were not enemies. Some even married our women and became part of our tribes. Wise Owl's voice grew sadder as he continued. But then came more white men, soldiers, settlers, gold seekers. These men did not want to live with us. They wanted to push us aside, to take our land, to kill our buffalo. They made promises and broke them. They signed treaties and ignored them. They said we must live on small pieces of land that they chose for us. Jake could hear the pain in the old man's voice, even through the translation. This was the history of his people's suffering, told by someone who had lived through it all. Many of our young warriors want to fight all white men now, Wise Owl continued. They say there can be no peace, no trust. They say the only good white man is a dead white man. Red Hawk and several other young chiefs nodded their heads in agreement. But I am old, Wise Owl said. I have seen that hatred only brings more hatred. War only brings more war. If we kill every white man we see, more will come to take revenge. If we trust no white man, we will never know if there are good ones among them. The old chief pointed a gnarled finger at Jake. This man did something that surprised us all. He risked his own life to save the life of one of our children. He did not know that Running Wolf was the son of a chief. He did not know that saving the boy might bring him a reward. He just saw a child in danger and acted to help. Wise Owl paused and looked around the circle at all the faces watching him. This tells us something important about this man's heart, but it also tells us something important about what might be possible between our peoples. Jake felt a flicker of hope, but he tried not to let it show on his face. The old man was not finished speaking yet. However, Wise Owl continued, and Jake's heart sank again. We cannot ignore the danger this man represents. If he returns to the white world and tells them about our village, soldiers might come. Our people could be killed, our children taken away to schools far from here. The old chief was quiet for a long moment, thinking. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the distant neighing of horses. I have decided, Wise Owl finally said. This white man will not die today. But he will not go free either. Jake's mind raced. What did that mean? Would they keep him as a prisoner? He will stay with us for 1 full moon, Wise Owl announced. During this time, he will learn our ways. He will work alongside our men, eat with our families, sleep in our lodges. We will watch him and learn what kind of man he truly is. Spotted Eagle continued translating as Wise Owl explained the conditions. If, after 1 moon, we believe he is a good man who will not bring harm to our people, he will be given a choice. He can stay with us forever and become one of our tribe, or he can leave, but only after he swears a sacred oath never to reveal the location of our village. Jake felt relieved, but also worried. A month was a long time. Anything could happen in a month. And what if they decided at the end that he could not be trusted? Would they kill him then? But, Wise Owl continued, his voice growing stern, if we discover that he has lied to us, or if he tries to escape, or if he does anything to harm our people, he will be killed immediately. No second chances, no more counsels, death. The old man sat down heavily as if the long speech had exhausted him. Chief Standing Bear stood up and said something to the circle. The other chiefs began to nod and murmur their agreement. It is decided, Spotted Eagle told Jake. You will stay with us for 1 moon. Chief Standing Bear will be responsible for you. You will live in his lodge and follow his instructions. Jake stood up slowly. He was alive, at least for now. That was better than he had dared to hope for when the council began. I understand, he said. I will do my best to prove that I am worthy of your trust. Running Wolf jumped up and ran to Jake, hugging him around the waist. The boy was grinning widely, clearly happy that his friend would not be killed. He chattered excitedly in his own language. Running Wolf says he will teach you to ride like a Blackfoot warrior. Spotted Eagle translated with a small smile. As the council broke up, people began to drift away from the circle. Some came over to look at Jake more closely, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Jake tried to look respectful and non-threatening. An old woman approached and said something to Spotted Eagle. The old man nodded and turned to Jake. "Grandmother, Moon Woman says you will need proper clothes if you are to live among us," he said. "She will make you buckskin shirt and leggings. Your white man's clothes mark you as outsider." Jake looked down at his worn cotton shirt and wool pants. They were practical for cowboy work, but they definitely made him stand out here. "Tell her I am grateful for her kindness," Jake said. As they walked back toward Chief Standing Bear's lodge, Spotted Eagle explained more about what Jake's life would be like for the next month. "You will work with the men during the day," he said, "hunting, caring for horses, making weapons. You will learn our language and our customs. The women will teach you about plants and medicines. The children will teach you games and songs." "What if I cannot learn these things?" Jake asked. "What if I'm too clumsy or too stupid?" Spotted Eagle chuckled. "You are not stupid. Stupid man does not risk his life to save drowning child, and everyone is clumsy when learning new things. Even our own children fall off horses many times before they learn to ride well." That evening, Jake ate dinner with Chief Standing Bear's family again. The mood was much more relaxed than the night before. Running Wolf sat close to Jake and tried to teach him words in the Blackfoot language. "Oki," the boy said, pointing to himself. "That means hello." "Oki," Jake repeated, trying to get the pronunciation right. Running Wolf giggled and corrected him. "Okay, like this." Jake tried again, and this time the boy nodded approvingly. Running Wolf's mother, whose name was Singing Bird, brought Jake a bowl of stew. She smiled at him and said something in her language. "She says you are welcome in our family," Chief Standing Bear said in his limited English. "She says any man who saves her son is like brother to her." Jake was touched by the woman's kindness. "Tell her I'm honored," he said. As the evening went on, more family members came to meet Jake. Running Wolf had two older brothers, both warriors in their 20s. They were polite but cautious, clearly still not sure what to make of their unexpected guest. He also had a younger sister, about 7 years old, who was fascinated by Jake's light-colored hair. She kept staring at him and whispering to her mother. "Little Fox wants to know if all white men have yellow hair like the sun," Singing Bird said through Chief Standing Bear's translation. Jake smiled and shook his head. "Some do, some do not, just like some of your people have lighter skin and some have darker skin." The little girl seemed satisfied with this answer. As Jake prepared for sleep that night, he thought about the strange turn his life had taken. 3 days ago, he had been a simple cowboy driving cattle across Montana territory. Now he was living with a tribe of Blackfoot Indians, his life dependent on their judgment of his character. The month ahead would be the most important of his life. Every action he took, every word he spoke would be watched and evaluated. If he made a mistake, if he offended someone, if he showed any sign of being a threat, he would be killed. But as Jake lay down on the soft buffalo robes, listening to the quiet breathing of Chief Standing Bear's family around him, he felt something he had not expected. He felt hope. Not just hope that he would survive, but hope that maybe he could learn something valuable from these people. Hope that maybe he could prove that white men and Indians could understand each other. Outside the lodge, Jake could hear the sounds of the village settling down for the night. Dogs. The month passed faster than Jake had expected. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new understanding. He learned to speak basic Blackfoot, enough to have simple conversations with the people around him. He learned to hunt with a bow and arrow, though he never became as skilled as the warriors who had been doing it since childhood. He learned to work with horses in ways he had never imagined. The Blackfoot method of training horses was different from what white cowboys did. Instead of breaking a horse's spirit, they worked with the animal's natural instincts, building trust and partnership. Jake also learned about the plants and medicines that grew in the mountains. The women taught him which roots could heal wounds, which berries were safe to eat, and which herbs could cure sickness. This knowledge might save his life someday, whether he stayed with the tribe or returned to the white world. But more than practical skills, Jake learned about the people themselves. He discovered that they were not the savage warriors that white people believed them to be. They were families just like any other families trying to take care of their children and live good lives. They had their own laws and customs that made sense for their way of life. They had their own stories and songs that passed down wisdom from one generation to the next. They had their own ways of solving problems and settling disputes that often worked better than the white man's courts. Jake also learned about their struggles. Many of the older people had stories of relatives who had been killed by soldiers or settlers. They had seen their hunting grounds taken away, their sacred places destroyed, their children forced into schools far from home. But despite all the reasons they had to hate white people, many of them showed Jake kindness and respect. They judged him by his actions, not by the color of his skin. Running Wolf became Jake's constant companion during that month. The boy taught Jake to ride in the Blackfoot style, standing on the horse's back or hanging from its side. Jake was never as graceful as Running Wolf, but he learned enough to impress some of the warriors. More importantly, Jake and Running Wolf became true friends. They could communicate now in a mixture of English, Blackfoot, and hand gestures. The boy told Jake about his dreams of becoming a great warrior like his father. Jake told Running Wolf about life in the white world, about towns and farms and cattle ranches. "Someday I want to see white man's town," Running Wolf said one evening as they sat by the river watching the horses drink. "Maybe someday you will," Jake replied. "But remember that your own people have much to be proud of too. Do not think that the white man's way is always better." Running Wolf nodded seriously. Even though he was young, he was already learning to think about the difficult choices his people would face in the years ahead. As the month drew to a close, Jake began to feel nervous again. Soon the council would meet again to decide his fate. Had he proven himself worthy of their trust? Had he shown that he could be a friend to their people? The signs seemed good. Men who had once looked at him with suspicion now greeted him with smiles. Women who had avoided him now included him in their conversations. Children who had been afraid of him now played games with him and laughed at his clumsy attempts to speak their language. But Jake knew that the final decision would not be based on popularity. It would be based on whether the leaders believed he could be trusted with the secret of their village's location. On the last day of the month, Wise Owl called for another council meeting. Once again the drums beat and the chiefs gathered in the sacred circle. But this time the mood was different. There was less tension, less anger in the air. Jake sat in the same place he had occupied a month before, but now he wore buckskin clothes like the other men. His hair had grown longer, and his skin was darker from spending so much time in the sun. He looked less like an outsider, and more like someone who belonged. Wise Owl stood up slowly, his ancient bones creaking with the effort. But his voice was stronger than it had been a month ago, as if the decision he was about to announce gave him energy. "1 moon ago, we faced a difficult choice," he began. Spotted Eagle translated for Jake, though by now Jake could understand some of the Blackfoot words himself. "We had a white man among us who claimed to be a friend. Many of us did not believe him. We thought he must be a spy or an enemy who would bring harm to our people." The old chief paused and looked directly at Jake. "We decided to test this man. We would watch him for 1 full moon and judge his heart by his actions. Today that test is complete." Jake held his breath, waiting for the verdict. "This man has lived among us with respect and humility," Wise Owl continued. "He has learned our ways without trying to change them. He has worked alongside our men without complaining. He has shown kindness to our children and respect to our elders." Some of the chiefs nodded in agreement. Even Red Hawk, who had been Jake's strongest opponent, seemed to be listening with an open mind. "More importantly," Wise Owl said, "this man has shown us something we had forgotten. He has shown us that it is possible for white men and red men to live together in peace. Not all white men are our enemies. Some like this one can be our friends." The old chief raised his hand toward the sky. "Therefore the council has decided. This man has earned our trust. He will be given the choice we promised him. He may stay with us forever and become one of our people. Or he may return to the white world, carrying with him our friendship and our hope for peace." Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. He was going to live. More than that, he had been accepted as a friend. "But," Wise Owl continued, "if he chooses to leave, he must swear a sacred oath. He must promise never to reveal the location of our village to anyone who would bring us harm. This oath will be witnessed by the spirits of our ancestors and the animals of the forest. To break such an oath would bring great misfortune upon him. Chief Standing Bear stood up and gestured for Jake to rise as well. The chief spoke directly to him in slow, careful English. "You have lived as my brother for 1 moon," he said. "You have shared our food, learned our ways, played with our children. Now you must choose. Will you stay with us or will you return to your own people?" Jake had been thinking about this choice for weeks. In some ways, life with the Blackfoot was appealing. It was simpler, more connected to the natural world. The people had accepted him and made him feel like family, but Jake also knew that he did not truly belong here. He had his own culture, his own way of looking at the world. He could visit this life, learn from it, but he could not become someone he was not. "I am honored by your offer," Jake said, choosing his words carefully. "You have shown me kindness that I will never forget. You have taught me things that will make me a better man for the rest of my life." He paused and looked around the circle, at all the faces watching him. "But I think I can serve our friendship better by returning to the white world. I can tell other white men what I have learned here. I can help them understand that your people are not savages or enemies. Maybe I can help prevent some of the fights and misunderstandings that cause so much pain for both our peoples." Wise Owl nodded slowly. "You speak wisdom," he said through Spotted Eagle's translation. "Perhaps the Great Spirit brought you to us for this purpose. Perhaps you are meant to be a bridge between our worlds." The oath-taking ceremony was elaborate and solemn. Jake had to repeat sacred words while holding eagle feathers and sacred stones. He promised never to reveal the location of the village, never to guide enemies to their camp, and never to forget the friendship he had found here. In return, the chiefs gave Jake gifts to take with him. Wise Owl presented him with a sacred eagle feather that would identify him as a friend to any Blackfoot warrior he might meet. Chief Standing Bear gave him a finely made knife with a bone handle carved, with the symbols of their tribe. But the most precious gift came from Running Wolf. The boy gave Jake a small leather pouch filled with special stones from the sacred mountain where their ancestors were buried. "These will remind you of your friend," Running Wolf said in his improving English. "When you look at them, you remember that somewhere in the mountains a Blackfoot boy thinks of you as his brother." Jake had to blink back tears as he accepted the gift. This child had become like a son to him during their time together. The next morning, Jake prepared to leave. The whole village came out to see him off. Many people he had worked with over the past month came to shake his hand or give him small gifts to remember them by. Chief Standing Bear personally escorted Jake to the edge of the valley. At the top of the ridge where Jake had first looked down on the village, they stopped for a final farewell. "You go back to White Man's world now," the chief said, "but you carry part of our world with you. Use what you have learned to make peace between our peoples." "I will," Jake promised. "And if you ever need a friend in the white world, send word to me. I will come." They clasped hands in the white man's fashion, then embraced in the Indian way. Jake mounted his horse and rode away without looking back, though he could feel hundreds of eyes watching him go. The journey back to the white settlements took Jake 3 days. As he rode, he thought about everything that had happened to him. A month ago, he had been a simple cowboy with a simple